Okay, everybody, let's get on to hand bottling. I think a lot of small wineries find themselves in this situation, and over the years, I've noticed that I get a lot of questions about hand bottling and things to do when you're running your own small line. So, why would you do hand bottling? There's some advantages. You can get the whole thing set up for $10, $15,000, maybe 20, but not much more than that. You can bottle whenever you want. And if you're in a small winery, you're going to want to bottle when you want. And you may not be able to afford to bring a big truck out, especially if you're in nowhere. So there's a lot of infrastructure that's come to town since I've been here. But the reality was when I made wine in Colorado, I couldn't call up a bottling truck to come. There wasn't one. It was just us. So that leads you to the next step is the QC is only as good as your crew. So making sure people can work together in a tight environment and can stay on task. The thing is that also you want to count on the fact that you can do 2, maybe 300 cases a day max without burning out a whole crew. That's just a lot to ask out of people. We tend to see on our 6-spout filler, if everything's ticking along perfectly, we can do about a case a minute. So we're talking about 60 cases an hour. But the reality is there's always something breaking. There's always something slowing down. There's always something getting hung up. It's really hard to maintain that speed. The downside is, labor cost is expensive. If you have to pay 7 people to stand on a truck all day to bottle 2,000 cases of wine, that's, going to translate, to a factor of 10 down is you 200 cases a day with 7 people. So it adds a lot to the cost in terms of labor. You're going to have to maintain it. You got to keep it up. You got to keep it clean. You got to keep it running. And it's also extra equipment that you have to have laying around your winery, depending on how much space you have. If space is a priority, it's that one extra thing you've kind of always got in the way. And then if you have to do this regularly, you get a repetitive motion disorder. Those of you that know me know that I have a ridiculously large right tricep. That was born out of years of hand corking. We hand corked around 3 to 4, 5,000 cases a year at Creekside. I did that for years, and I developed a mutant tricep as a result. And if you keep doing it long enough, you'll start to get arthritis and other things. So definitely the potential for lots of repetitive motion disorder just because you're moving so we're the same thing, doing the same thing over and over. So here's some wines we've hand bottled. We've hand bottled more than this: Petit Verdot, Cab Sauv, GSM, Sangiovese, and or Barbera, Cab Franc, Syrah, and notice on all those there's a little star. I run them all through a 10 micron bug catcher anyway, so I guess they're technically filtered, but we're really not trying to remove microbes per se. We're just trying to make sure that there isn't a fruit fly or something that gets in there. And then also things that we do totally unfiltered are fortified wine, because who cares? That's why you make fortified wine. It's indestructible. That's the great news about it. Making fortified wine is a whole lot of fun, and it changes the whole game because you can get away with murder, literally, and because you kill lots of microbes by adding alcohol. And then next thing is sparkling wine. Obviously, we don't filter that. If you filtered it, you'd ruin it. So bottling it live. And so what's really interesting is, and kind of terrifying, is that you're bottling, that same sparkling wine, which is totally loaded up with microbes on the same line that you're, bottling the next run that you're going to bottle on that line is Muscadot and L, which is 8.5% alcohol or maybe 10%, but still with a lot of residual sugar. And that requires some tenacity and attention to detail on the cleaning. So here's what you need to be able to get a hand bottling line set up. You get a Sparger. I think there's an $1,100 one from Vintner's Vault. There's one for like $2,700 that's a bottle rinser from GW Kent. And those are good. They're needed to be able to blow out anything that's in the bottles. You're going to need nitrogen or CO2, like in the Muscat, if you want a little dissolved CO2, and a regulator. Regulator set you back $100 from a welding store. Bottling line itself, they're from all over the place. You can get them. You get in GW Kent and Vintner's Vault, or 2 I can think of off the top of my head. But there are numerous other places to acquire them from, little 6-head and 7-head fillers. And they're, depending on the quality and everything else, they're from $1,000 to $5,000. Then you're going to need a closure applicator, crown sealer. You can get an automatic one for $2,000. The hand ones work just fine for crown seal. You know me, I love crown seal. I wish we'd crown seal more wine. They are just so inexpensive and so effective. Then if you want to get a screw capper, they're about 10 G's. There's only one company that makes them. They got a little door on it. And then your corker, you can get a good hand corker for $600. Don't buy the cheap one, buy the good one. You'll wear out the cheap one in no time, and they're really murder on the corks. So buy the nicer one, or you can go to an automatic, and the one we have downstairs is about $10,000 for that particular unit. A labeler, there's a whole bunch of different companies out there that do them. The one we have now is no longer in business, but it still works pretty well. And just a hand labeler is really necessary. Trying to hand label wines is a nightmare. I spent the first 2 or 3 years of my wine industry labeling bottles with glue sticks. And then the other thing is for labor, you know, you're going to have about 7 people that you're going to need to stand around and do this. So nitrogen. You're going to need this for sparging bottles. You usually want your sparging pressure between 30 and 50 psi. You're going to need about 1 bottle per 1 to 200 cases, depending on the sparge rate and flow rate into the filler bowl. So sort of count on that when you're buying your hard goods. Accurate regulator is good. You're going to need 40 psi for sparging, somewhere around there. But you're also going to need a really accurate gauge to do your bubble point testing when sterile membrane's in place. And we're going to talk about bubble point testing on a hand. A Sparger, it injects nitrogen into the bottles, blows out glass dust or bugs or anything else. Just by doing this one action, you can lower the dissolved oxygen in your wine by 1 milligram a liter. So the thing is that once you sparge, though, those bottles should never sit longer than 1 minute from sparge until it's on the bottling line. So this is one of those things where you've got to keep it really close, keep it tight, and not over sparge the bottles. And whoever the sparger is, usually there's always this like competitiveness, and there's always one pinch point. Well, the sparger is always faster than the bottler. So it's like, here, let me see if I can load up the poor bottling person with too many bottles. Don't do that. Make sure that they're getting moved along quickly, because that nitrogen leaves really quickly and oxygen will go back in the bottle. And also yeast or whatever else might too. So here's what your hand bottling line looks like. Parts, 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 parts. There's lots of little pieces. And the thing I want to take away from this is that every single one of these spots is a place that something can live in. So some microbe can tuck up in there and sit there until you decide to bottle, and then it'll jump off into your wine. So if we're looking at the top, this is our filler bowl. This is the top of the bottling line. And this is a float. It's really similar to one in your toilet that turns on and off. The float raises up and it closes a little valve that keeps the wine from overfilling the bowl. If that's broken, it obviously will overflow, which we have done, which is not pretty. So make sure that's working. And we'll have to take that and realize after we bottle sparkling, this all has to come out. All has to come out, all has to come apart, and has to be totally cleaned. Here's our filler tops with level spacing. So if you look at the top where those little cracks are, these particular ones set the level based on that, the filler level. So you take off that black ring and you can put on a different thickness and slide the top up and down, and it'll change your fill level. So depending on how high or low that goes into the bottle, that's what sets the fill level on the bottles. Can't really see very well in this picture. These were taken a while ago, but I'm not allowed back in the building to take new ones. But if you could see closely, you can see that there's some split on the gasket, and there's cracks around the edges on them. And so subsequently, when you see that, and you have to check all your gaskets all the time, get in there and inspect them with a magnifying glass, you have to replace them, because that's a really good place for microbes to hide out. So taking the gaskets off regularly and replacing them is necessary. We all make ethanol. It's your best friend. This is what we clean a lot with. You do want to water your ethanol down to about 70%. You don't want to use 100% alcohol. So we want to use this 75% alcohol like they have in the picture, because if you use pure grain alcohol or pure denatured alcohol, the alcohol will get on whatever you're trying to kill, and it won't penetrate the cell membrane or the membrane of the of the microbe. You need a little water to change the osmotic gradient to allow it to suck that alcohol into the cell and kill it. So we use a lot of this. We distill our own. It helps. So first thing we do is pop on all the filler tubes. This is just a picture of how they go on. Those pop on first and they go on upright. Another angle of it just to take a look at how those set up. This is a stop seal, and I want you to look at this really hard because this thing is mangled and they don't make these anymore. So I soak these in pure alcohol for days before we use them. And this is a little stop seal and it goes next. So this is, next thing we do is we put on a spring, then we slide on the stop seal and it goes on what looks to be upside down. And I've been to wineries that never take these apart. And it's mortifying to see what's inside of them. But we take ours apart after every single bottling. Here's our filler nipple cap, and this screws into the end. Be really, really, really careful. If you notice the second one from the left, you can already see where the threads are starting to wear down. Stainless steel likes to cross thread really easy. It likes to strip really easy. So being really careful to get these threaded on perfectly is important. Here's our filter housing. It's a code 7. If you look up top, there's a gauge for bubble point testing and forward flow pressure. We got a nitrogen input on the left. You can see where there's a quick connect there. And then there's a wine breather tube on the right. And then note that we have this all hard plumbed into the line so we can steam it. There's no soft lines anywhere in here because from that point on the left, before the housing, we can have wine that's, you know, really clean but not sterile. What's going to come out the other side of that filter is totally sterile. So we want to make sure that we have that all completely tight and that when we steam the line that it completely pasteurizes absolutely everything in that line. So here's our hard plumbing from filter to filler bowl. Ideally, we would do this with a solid plumb. And one of the things I don't like about this setup is notice there's a thing called a dog leg. So we've got the wine coming in and then there's a place for the wine to kind of pool in there. And that's just a hard thing to get totally sterile. So we do a little extra steaming. It's not ideal, but it works. And given the cost of what it would take to have us build something properly for it for as little as we bottle, it's just been a cost benefit analysis that this is going to be the way that we do it. It's worked over the years and we just go ahead and inspect it. But again, it's hard plumbed. That way we can steam and pasteurize absolutely everything. And here's the final assembly with all the breather tubes. And one thing to note is these particular lines do not come plumbed with nitrogen gas in the top. So the lid, I drilled the lid on this and made it so that nitrogen constantly flows at a really low rate into the filler bowl up top. And this is really important. We did some testing on a line like this, and when you don't have that in place, you pick up like 2 or 3 milligrams a liter of dissolved oxygen because you know how the wine circulates and bubbles back through the lines. It's really, really tremendously bad. So drilling and tapping in a little nipple for nitrogen to blow in there constantly while you're bottling is a really, really good thing to do for wine quality. So here's your critical control points. Check all your gaskets, replace the damaged ones, always assemble with 70% alcohol, and then we steam the line. The hottest, thickest piece of the metal of the line, as soon as that hits 90 degrees centigrade, we'll hold that and run it for 20 minutes. Once the thickest, heaviest valve at the end of the line hits that point, we'll run it for 20 minutes and then we'll cool it. And then after we cool it, we fill it all up with water, nice cold water, and we'll bubble point on the filter. Other things to pay attention to when you're bottling, critical control points, especially when you're sterile bottling, really quick movements. So there's probably not a whole lot of microbes living in a glass factory. Not exactly a good source of food in a boiling river of lava. So the bottles come in pretty sterile. So you want to get them out quickly, get them sparged quickly to the line, and then quickly to the capper or screw capper or whatever else. As soon as the wine's closed, then you can relax a little bit, and as you get the wine labeled, you get it labeled. If you want to get a big enough table to stack up wine so that when you're changing out labels and things like that, the bottling process can continue on. But it's just really important to make sure that everything's quick and close together. And it sounds silly, but if you can save somebody from reaching 1 foot difference, and you bottle 300 cases of wine, effectively that person is going to have to walk a mile to do that movement, not 3,600 feet anyway. But and so if you can shorten that distance up a little bit, you can save a tremendous amount of time and speed. Everything has really got to be close and monitored, and you really have to have somebody there that's just paying attention to everybody and making sure that they're staying on task and paying attention, and that nobody's kind of becoming the literal bottleneck because they're not paying attention to how fast the filler's filling. And it's really amazing when you have the wrong person in place, they'll cut productivity by half. You have the right person in place, it'll run twice as fast. And it's interesting. You always get the person that's just yakking away and they're forgetting to fill lines. And yeah, it's fun and everything, but you're not getting the wine bottled. You're going to be there a lot longer. So here's some post-bottling data. And again, every time we do this is again going back to 2015, but they're always the same. The SO2s we figured out how to get down quite a bit, but by just making that one big SO2 out at the end with the juice reserve. But nonetheless, note we send them in, and we always get scorpion panels done on them to make sure that we're sterile. It's pretty cheap insurance, helps you sleep at night, and know that you're not sending out bombs, and you've done your due diligence. If one does accidentally re-ferment for whatever reason, at least you tried, and at least you've got documentation that you try to do everything properly. And that's keeps you out of a lawsuit. So at the end of the day, there's a huge number of factors. Remember the 7 P's when coming to bottling. This is it. The 7 P's. This is a good rule for life. Proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. And get it right. I've unbottled a lot of wine. I don't want you to have to go through that. Hopefully you'll learn from my mistakes. And the other thing I want you to look at is that picture on the right is a bottling line gasket. And I went to a winery in which they said they brought me in as a consultant, and I asked them what the problem was. And they said, we have, in every single case of our Riesling, we have 1 bottle re-fermenting. 1 bottle out of all of them. Everyone else is fine, but 1 bottle per case. And I looked the owner dead in the eye and I said, you have a 12 spout filler, don't you? And he goes, indeed we do. And I was like, show me the filter. And we walked out, and this was the 1 gasket. And the 1 gasket was filthy. And when they steam the line, they'd lift that up and out of the way, and it never got steamed. It never get hot. So it was never pasteurized. So this 1 gasket was totally manky, covered with Lord knows what, and it was infecting every single bottle with just enough yeast. Only takes 1 cell. And eventually, once SO2 got low enough, they all re-ferment. Every bottle, 1 bottle in every single case re-fermented. So unbottling is no fun, and it always damages the wine. Last thing I want to show you is this. I lent out our corker a number of years ago. This is 2016 when I got this back from a winery, small winery, former student, and he bottled, and I let him. This is why we don't rent equipment anymore either. And he bottled and then returned the corker, but he didn't know to clean out the vacuum catch can. And so I went downstairs and looked at the corker. It had been sitting there for a while, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I went in there, and there was some filth growing in the bottom of the catch can, and it was pretty moldy and gross. So I scraped it out, put it in a tube, and sent it out for a scorpion. And this was the vector. 2016 was our first vintage that we got Brettanomyces, and here it is, right here. This is the patient 1. This was the vector that allowed Brettanomyces into our winery. And the 2016 vintage was the first year we saw it. So when renting out your equipment or lending your equipment or sharing your equipment, realize this is what can happen. So just something to be aware of, and realize that in bottling, you've got to be a little bit more diligent than anything else. That's the end. And again, I want to go back to one last thing. Taming of the Screw by Tyson Stelzer is awesome. You should all own that book. It should be required reading.